Are you ready to unlock the next level of leadership and scale your business in a way that actually frees up your time? Welcome back to another episode of the Vital Wealth Strategies podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Lonergan, and today we're diving deep into the mindset and strategies that separate great leaders from the rest. Joining me is Christian Muntean, an expert in leadership development who has helped businesses scale by over $500 million from when he initially started working with them. He's also the author of Train to Lead, which is a great book that I highly recommend. He's built a powerful framework for leadership that blends discipline, endurance, and strategic delegation. In this conversation, you'll discover why working less and leading better is the key to real growth, how to build a culture where your team thrives, and why the way you model values, attitudes, and beliefs directly impacts your company's success. Plus, we get into the power of rest, resilience, and having the right conversations with your team to drive lasting, meaningful progress. If you're serious about making massive moves in your business, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's get into it. Christian Muntean, thank you for joining us here today. I'm excited about our conversation. You're an advisor to owners, executives, and boards. You're the founder of Vantage Consulting, and you've done a great job just empowering owners and executives in small and medium-sized businesses to boost their revenues. You've done that and helped businesses grow by over $500 million, which I think is tremendous. We have a goal of saving our clients over $1 billion in income tax, and I imagine you're on the same trajectory. Let's increase growth by $1 billion. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you for having me.
I do have to say, I consume a lot of books. I happen to listen to a lot of books, and I got through Train to Lead, and I was just impressed with this book in general. Not just because it was full of great content, but you give us an actionable plan to really take our leadership and develop those skills and continue to work on it. I just so appreciate the content you put together. And I also want to just acknowledge working with high-level entrepreneurs. We come across a lot of, I'll call them business coaches and that type of thing, that have maybe read some blog articles, have gone to some seminars, but they don't have the backing that I feel like you have. And I'm looking forward to getting into your story and digging into your process. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those very kind words. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So if it's okay, I'm going to outline, I think about our entrepreneurs, and all of them are trying to grow and scale their businesses. And a key piece of that is being a great leader. Because if it's just me running around trying to get things done, if I can't leverage other people to help grow, like we're going to run into a problem. And really, I see sort of three problems, high level. First, leading people is just hard, right? I can lead this person one way, and then the next person, if I try the same leadership tactics, may not get the same results. And then I'm also have this like nagging feeling that I'm just going to screw it up, right? Like I'm gonna run this business into the ground. I'm gonna people are going to leave the organization because I don't lead well. And then, at the end of the day, I can go get my MBA. And it's interesting how not many of our clients have their MBA. It's like they've learned most of their business skills from the School of Hard Knocks. But even if I did go to school, most of the things I feel like are taught in the classroom just don't apply to the business world when it comes to leadership and development. So, if it's okay, can you give us a little bit of your background? I know you've got an interesting background, and just talk us through how you developed this framework around leadership.
Sure. I've been I'm located in Alaska, and I've been advising and consulting for just over 20 years. I got my start in this space working in international disaster relief and development. So I was working in places like Sudan and Indonesia. I was working in Kosovo. I was working in the Middle East, places like that. And what I saw was that we could be in very well-funded projects in pretty secure areas. And if our team didn't get along well, or it wasn't led well, it was very, very hard to be successful in the project. And it was also just a very emotionally difficult experience. On the other hand, you could be in an active conflict zone in an underfunded project, and it was amazing what we could accomplish and the sense of pride and camaraderie you could feel. And so I became fascinated with that dynamic, and that led me on a journey to try to understand leadership and organizational dynamics.
Yeah.
And that eventually led me to where I'm at now.
Sure. I love that. And I don't know of a better place to maybe learn and develop your leadership skills than a high stress disaster recovery scenario. But the stakes are probably high, the emotions are high, the stress is high, and if you don't have good leadership, somebody that could sort of bring calm to the scenario and sort of get everybody moving in the right direction, and I'm sure it's challenging. So
yeah, absolutely.
I would love to dig into the framework that you've put together, and I love how you've done it in we'll call it a fitness framework. And we start off with healthy habits, nutrition, and environment. Then we move to conditioning and building your foundation. Then once we've built that foundation, we go on to strength, which is making the things happen. And then we finish up with the final two, power, decisiveness, speed, and momentum. And then lastly is endurance, staying with it over the long haul. So can we talk a little bit about the healthy habits? Because I think
Sure.
We just did an episode at the beginning of the year on goal planning. And from my point of view, goals are great, but goals without a system and a process to help you get there are worthless.
Right.
I think about if I just know every single day I show up to the gym and, I stay away from the processed foods and, eat well, I'm going to lose weight and get healthier. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think some of those same things can be taken, a lot of those same concepts can be taken to the business world. Can you talk us a little bit about developing healthy habits and what needs to happen there?
Yeah. So the concept, and kind of backing up just a little bit, the framework of the book. So I used to be a strength and conditioning instructor for about 12 years, and I worked with a lot of different kinds of athletes. Been involved in athletics pretty much my whole life. And there's a structure of training athletes called periodization, which we don't need to get into. But that's basically, one day I was driving away from the gym, and I thought, it's interesting that you can take an athlete and you can design a training regimen that will allow them to peak out the day of their event. We know how to do that precisely. But when it comes to leaders, it's always this, here's a bunch of information, now don't screw up. And we just hope something sticks and something works. And I thought we ought to be able to do better than that. And I wondered if the structures for thinking through building a training regimen for athletes might apply to leaders. And what I found, and I think you see this in the book, is that it applies pretty well. So at the very beginning, if you want to become fit or more athletic or more skilled or lose weight, whatever your goals are, the very foundation of this is creating a lifestyle. You hear this all the time with crash diets and the criticism around them. This time of year, gyms are full. Everybody just got their new gym memberships. They've made their New Year's resolutions, and they'll all start to empty out in about 3.5 months. And it's because people haven't translated this desire or this goal into a set of very basic habits that will allow them to become fit. And so leaders need to do the same thing. And there's a set of core areas that you want to build habits in, that if you do that, success is just more naturally likely to be a result.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that you also talk about in this sort of core habits is how we see ourselves, other people. And I think that's underestimated. I don't think it's talked about enough. My worldview and how I perceive myself. And I think part of the problem is most of us we're not even aware of our limiting beliefs. We're not even aware of the things that are holding us back from what's possible and what we can do out there. And so I think that's an interesting point. Once we become aware, we can now decide, okay, is this something I want to hang on to, or should I let go of that limiting belief and try, this new belief structure on? And
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that, but I thought that was a worthwhile point to bring up, because I think it's critical. I think oftentimes it might be the number one thing that drives people to certain levels of success is just what they believe is possible and how they think about the world. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk before the show started about levels of growth and how mindset can impact that. And I found that oftentimes leaders will lead up to their own self-built ceilings. And they may blame other things or circumstances, but oftentimes that ceiling was built in ourselves. And that comes from how we see ourselves, our own potential, and just our own perspective of ourselves. How we tend to see other people. Or do we tend to believe that people can provide good and do well? Or do we tend to be critical or distrustful? And how that belief that we have actually scientifically is shown to actually translate into their own behavior and what they do. And then it's same thing, how do we see the world around us? And the very core of this is a leader can only lead to what they can see. And so if I don't see a hopeful future, if I don't see potential, I can't lead into much. I'm just protecting what I have and trying to hold on, which is a very limited form of leadership. And so the idea is to really actively begin to look at these lenses of how I see myself, others, and the world around me as a way of evaluating, mindset blocks.
Yeah, I love it. And, the scriptures tell us that without a vision, the people perish, right? And I think that's one of the things you're talking about. It's like, okay, we need to see a vision for the future that we can drive forward, be excited about. And I think that's fantastic. All right. So I think this is great. We're building these foundational pieces, these habits that are going to really lay the framework for I'll say the next building block, and that's conditioning, and we're building the foundation. And so I'm happy to have you talk about some of these pieces, but there's two that I'll say almost conflict, and I want to touch on these a little bit. First is intensity, and then is patience. To some level, it's like I think about the intensity piece, right? If I just keep grinding, I think we see that in the 80-hour work week, right? If I just keep putting in more and more effort, I can get more results and we'll have more success. And if I expect the same out of my team, right? If I just drive them really hard, we'll get to the goal that we're looking for. But then on the opposite side of that, almost seems like patience sort of conflicts with that. And so I've got a few thoughts on that, right? Like, I think intensity, we do need to rest as leaders, right? I think the Sabbath is awfully important. Again, going back to the scriptures, Sabbath was not made for God, but made for man. It's for our benefit that we rest, and all of the data seems to support the rest is really good for us. But can you talk a little bit about that dynamic between intensity and patience and how we balance that well?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is when I describe intensity, I don't mean that rise and grind perspective of the 80-hour work week. I'm talking about being able to concentrate and focus your effort very, very intently on your specific task or goal or objective that you're pursuing, and then know when to stop. So when you're training in athletic training, it's knowing how to be able to push yourself up to, typically, not to get too technical about it, but typically you push yourself up to about 85, 90% intensity level, maybe just over 90%. And you want to be able to know how to do that. Most people going to most gyms never even approach that level of intensity. Trained athletes will, and at that point, it triggers growth in your body. But you don't sustain that for very long. In fact, you can train. Most people don't believe this, but you can actually train for 15 or 20 minutes a day at the right level of intensity, and you'll see pretty dramatic growth physically. Like, you don't have to spend hours in the gym if you know how to do it. And it's the same thing when I work with leaders who are trying to grow their companies, is they often believe that if I'm running a $10 million company and I want to get to a $20 million company, I'm going to have to work twice as hard. And in my experience, I can take a company from 10 to 20 to 40 million, and the workload or the work hours that are put in by the leader will go down because they learn to be very, very intense in the right places for the right amount of time. And the patience part ties into that, or I had never thought about them conflicting, but they I guess they could be seen that way, is that I guess it's the belief that if I just put in the right amount of intensity over months, over a year, I'll get the results. And most people have a hard time doing enough work and then letting it go.
Yeah. We're all looking for, and I think it's promoted out there, the drive-through breakthrough, right? Like if I just go do this thing real quick, I'll get the results, right? The 5-minute abs, so to speak, in regards to the. But I think so are you saying with the patience piece? Because I look at most things, my fitness, my marriage, my walk with the Lord, all of these things take a lot of consistent effort, right? I can't go to the gym for 24 hours straight and get the results that I would like you said, if I would work out 15 minutes at the right intensity for 5 days a week for, equivalent to 24 hours, I'm going to get much more benefit out of that than trying to have this, maximum intensity for a sustained period of time. So is that where you're at with patience? Are you saying like we just need to be patient with the results, or can you just clarify that for me?
Yeah, it's patience with the process and patience with the results. So let's say with fitness, if I go into the gym and I'm training because I really, really, really want to be whatever, and I train for 4 hours a day or 8 hours a day, and like some of these actors will train to get ready for a role, and what they'll almost all tell you is they hated it. It was an awful experience, and they will almost all tell you how broken down their body was by the end of that time period. They may have looked great temporarily, but they're not able to sustain that afterwards. And so the idea is if you really want to build a business, build a team, build yourself as a leader, you pursue meaningful incremental gains over time and allow the entire process to play itself out. And that allows it to stick. If you're building a team, for example, and you're hoping somebody will demonstrate greater management capacity, having the patience to allow that person to grow, because you can't just have a chat with someone and all of a sudden they get it and now they're there. So giving them some time and understanding, okay, they're going to need iterations of this. They're going to need trial and error and mistakes to grow. And applying that same thing to yourself is huge.
Yeah.
Does that help clarify?
It does. And I think one thing that there's this, I don't know if misnomer is the right term, but I think of the Mamba mentality, like Kobe Bryant, right? He would be doing exactly what you were talking about. He'd be in the gym before everybody else. He'd be there after everybody else. He put in massive amounts of time. He had this, and he admitted to the fact that if you really want to pursue greatness, everything else around you, you're going to be bad at, right? You're going to be bad at as a husband. You're going to be bad as a father because you have this sole focus. And I wonder if there was a more efficient way for Kobe to get there, right? If he was actually doing harm to his body because he was overtrained versus like getting the appropriate amount of rest and that type of thing. Because I think all of the data seems to support anything more than a 40-hour work week, you're less productive, right? Like have intentional focus on the things that really matter and then just rest.
It actually supports shorter, somewhere around 32 to 36 hours is most of what you see.
Yeah. And I want to go back to just the to grow the business, you actually have to work less. I think that can be hard for people to wrap their heads around, but I think it's something that we see regularly. We see people that they really have to start leveraging their team, leading well, delegating things, and the more they settle into their, to use a Dan Sullivan strategic coach term, unique ability, right? The more they settle into their unique ability, the more the business can grow. It's when they're trying to do all of these other tasks that they should probably get their hands out of that, slows things down. So I think that's a fantastic point that I just wanted to touch on, that you really do have to start leveraging people to get the growth you want. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem. So let's move into the next piece, making things happen. And when I think about that, it starts at the top, right? Like I need to model the way. I need to be living out the example of how I'm going to lead my team. And then from there, we've got going back to that vision we talked about. Can you just talk about maybe modeling, like and how important that is to.
Well, it's massively important. There's an interesting dynamic that happens where leaders I guess I'll put it this way: leaders automatically model the way, whether they're thinking about it or trying to or not. So it's an unconscious thing that we just naturally do. What I'm encouraging through the book is intentionality and thoughtfulness about what we're actually modeling. Part of the research that I pull into there has to do with what's called mirror neurons, and that our brain is actually wired to mimic or replicate what we see in people that we respect or admire or view as strong. And so what happens within organizations is I can often work with frontline staff in a company that might have dozens of levels of management. And I can often tell you about, if I work with enough frontline staff in enough locations, I can often tell you about the senior leadership team without having ever met them. If I start to see common behaviors amongst the frontline staff, because that will come through. And so for owners who have really the most power in an organization, if you're an owner or you're an executive, particularly like a CEO or a president, your values and your behaviors and the way you relate will unintentionally inform others on what's acceptable, and they'll just start to, in certain ways, respond to that, and in many ways, somehow mimic what they're seeing. They don't mimic what you believe. They don't mimic the value statements written on your website or on the walls of your building. They mimic the behaviors that they see and the attitudes that they perceive from you. And so you want to become aware of, if I want to model a company that says integrity is one of our values, how do I portray that when it comes to communicating our financial performance over the last quarter? How do I communicate that when it comes to dealing with staff performance issues or my own performance issues, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Another piece that we've touched on, but enabling other people, right? Giving them the authority to go take action. And you touched on something earlier that I think is critical, that a lot of business owners, I think, don't have a lot of tolerance for, is people making mistakes, right? There was an example of at IBM, I think this was back in the 70s, somebody made $1 million mistake, right? And I believe it was Tom Watson at the time was CEO, and one of his key people said, "Hey, this guy screwed this thing up. I assume we've got to fire him." And he was like, "No, we just paid $1 million to train this person. Do you think they're ever going to make that mistake again?" And so, you obviously want to avoid $1 million mistakes, but I think there's a level of like helping people fail forward, because I think that's what we do as business owners. We're trying lots of things. They don't always work. We make mistakes and we adjust and move forward. And so being able to like coach your people up as time goes on, I think is a critical piece. So can you talk about that? Because I also think about that in relationship to values and vision. I don't need to micromanage somebody if they know the values and the vision, because I just want them to test their decision making based on that, and then go move forward. So can you talk about building people up?
The tendency for people, broadly speaking, the tendency is for many people to say, I made a mistake. I never want to make a mistake and feel embarrassed or stupid or judged or whatever again. And so therefore I will never try something again. That's maybe 80% to make up a number of people's responses. Then you have another group of people that they make a mistake and they never really reflect on what they might have learned from that. They just kind of make the mistake and keep on. They make the $1 million mistake. Nobody talks to them about it. They didn't learn anything, so it wasn't the $1 million lesson. It was a nothing lesson that cost a lot of money, and they just move on and they didn't learn anything. And so I think what you want to do is, for the folks that are having a hard time interpreting, which is almost everybody, this experience, you want to help guide them to understand, what is it that you learned from this? And how do we learn something from it that's meaningful, and not just meaningful, digestible. So if you have $1 million mistake, and this is an employee that makes $75,000 a year, that to them is going to be mind-blowing. Like they're going to feel, if they feel sense of responsibility, they're going to feel crushed by that. You don't want that to happen. But what you do want to do is help them recognize, hey, you have the influence to have this level of impact on the future of this company and the performance of this company. Let's help you understand how your performance can have these impacts and help them see the connections, because many people don't really see them. They don't have a strong sense of agency, and they don't really understand how much impact that they can have. And so you want to try to, as much as possible, you do want to try to help people to gain confidence so that they don't feel crushed or discouraged, but then also that they learn from that. And I think a lot of that has to do with spending time with people, unpacking it a bit, and helping them frame, okay, now what do we do next?
Yeah, I love it. Next, I want to talk about, as the business grows, the business when we had 5 people, we can't have the same structure when we have 25 people to 50 people. We have to be challenging the process. We've got to be saying, hey, look, just because we've always done it that way, we can't keep doing it that way. We've got to reboot. Can you talk about the value of, and this is something that I ask myself regularly, is what is the truth of this situation, right? Because I think as owners, sometimes we like to stick our heads in the sand and just ignore the truth of the situation and just keep moving forward. So can you talk about the value of saying what needs to be said?
When it comes to growth, and you'd reference challenging the process and saying what needs to be said. When it comes to growth is often, most owners will say, okay, we're going to grow by 10% a year over year for the next forever. And it's going to be this nice curve that ends up in this fantastic hockey stick at the end of it. Nobody experiences that. Growth usually looks like a set of stairs. And my experience is most people feel stuck at the bottom of something that feels like a wall, like we can't get through this. I've got my team of 24, and I just can't figure out how to get to the next level. And what they don't understand is that they're not actually facing a wall, they're facing the bottom of the next step. And the only way to get up to that next step is to begin to change something about how you think and something about how you trust and work with other people. It's going to require some level of mindset change and some level of structural change within the company. And if you're not open to hearing from your team about these things or from other peers or advisors, you'll just stay stuck, because all you can see is this wall in front of you. And it's going to require someone else saying, I think if you were to empower a management team, or if you were to let go of doing this, or whatever the thing is, then you see those jumps.
Yeah. So I'm sure you see this. We see this with clients, and they're doing things a certain way, and it's our job to bring new ideas and frameworks into their lives so they can go, oh, I see how that's going to unlock new opportunity for us. Can you just talk us through how you help an owner? Because the whole team underneath, they're typically not the visionaries, right? They're doing the stuff, and they're just doing sort of what their job description tells them to do. But can you talk about how you help an owner unlock new ways of thinking?
Well, I guess I have a bag of tools that I use for that. And so it's not always the same tool for each person or each situation. There are many owners that are very visionary. And so some of what I need to help them do is understand the benefits of discipline and consistency, because a lot of them kind of despise that. They, at an instinctual level, they hate sameness. And that's what drives a lot of creativity and growth for them. And helping them understand and respect the consistency, that the analogy I often use is if you're driving a little tiny sports car all by yourself, you can whip corners and flip around and do donuts and all this kind of stuff, and it'll be fun for you. However, if you're driving a school bus that's towing a trailer and you start taking these hard corners, you're going to throw everybody around, and it's going to be scary and awful for everyone. And so you have to learn that as your organization grows, it's not that you don't take turns, but you have to do it differently. And so part of it's framing it that way. There's another large group of leaders that are not particularly visionary, or they're not as visionary as they think they are. And part of what I do is help them understand how to pull vision or extract vision from their teams and pull ingredients of vision out of the people around them and build a larger composite vision that's truly engaging for the entire organization. And that often can help them begin to think much bigger, because while employees within an organization may not be the grand visionaries necessarily, although some are, almost all of them can see something. And they have some element of vision for, man, if we just did this, things would work better around here. And if you can pull those things out, you can build something very strong.
Yeah, I love it. I think about engaging hearts and minds, right? Like that's a piece of this power section that you're talking about. And I think this is where we have to engage with the team and get them excited. We've got to get them all on board. Can you talk a little bit about the hearts and minds, and then maybe also, if you want to touch on like encouraging the heart, I think that's a key piece. What distinguishes truly great leaders? I think those would be good pieces to touch on. So
sure. Well, let me back up a little bit too, because power in the context of leadership is understood in different ways, and I'm using it in a way that's different than what most people. So I want to be clear about that. So the way I refer to power is based off of the way it would be used in physics or fitness. Strength is the ability to exert force and make something happen. Power is the ability to do that with speed. Basically, it's the addition of speed. And what it does is it allows something to generate momentum or to interact with something else and change its direction. So those are the two concepts that I'm trying to grab with leadership power. It's not the ability to just control people. At least that's not the way I'm using it. I'm using it with the ability to create new momentum in the organization or to change the direction of something in a healthier way or a more effective way. In terms of engaging people, like if you're going to lead change, the primary concept underneath all of it is to understand what motivates those individuals. So if I'm working with a team of a dozen people and I understand that this team, I've talked to all of them, I've interviewed all of them, and they're primarily motivated by job security. They want to know we're going to have jobs next year. There's a lot of turmoil, change in our industry. They want to know we've got jobs next year. Then I know the vision should include something that provides some assurance that they're going to be financially okay if they keep contributing to the fulfillment of this vision.
Yeah.
And if someone else has a vision, or there's a number of people on the team where they have the vision personally for advancement or to be able to take on new challenges or grow professionally, then the vision or the change that we're trying to communicate will be more readily received if people can see that if we succeed at this, opportunities for my advancement will come with it. So it's appealing to, you could call it people's enlightened self-interest. If they contribute to the greater good, then they themselves will benefit. And the effective leader will take time to understand, what does this person really want? And how do I make the larger goal be an answer to their personal question?
Yeah. I love it. That's it's fantastic. So if I think about the next phase, now we're looking at endurance, and this is again, the drive-through breakthrough is not real, right? We have to stay with it over the long haul, and so we look at we'll just say the stock market, and history is undefeated, right? There's not a business that has been around for eternity, right? They all have these ebbs and flows. So there's obviously challenges there, but can you talk a little bit about structure and systems, putting great leadership onto autopilot? Because I love that idea, and I'd like you to just share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So a major part of my work is helping companies scale and then also helping companies sell. And for both, a company will scale much faster and with less drama if it has good systems. In other words, if you have a good playbook available to the members of your team that allows things to be replicable. So a gym analogy for this is, if you walk into most gyms, you'll find that the gym is just full of machines. And the reason gyms love machines is you could take somebody who knows nothing about fitness, put them on a machine for, working a chest a press or shoulders or something like that, and there's one very defined movement pattern that they can follow to do that exercise, they're going to be pretty safe. The chances of them hurting themselves are minimal. They'll also get a workout. So they'll get what they want. You can train a whole bunch of people or allow people to train without having many staff there. You can have one teenage kid at the desk running, 100 people getting a workout at Planet Fitness or something like that. And so it's that idea of, if you want to be able to have replicable success over many different departments or locations, you need to have the rule book or playbook defined so people can follow it. And that's whether that's built into how things are structured or it's, a recipe written out that people follow. That allows for growth. It also allows for companies that are getting ready for success to sell. That drives enormous value into that company as far as their multiple.
Right. Absolutely. So this is great. I want to touch on rest and recovery, because I think this is something we've seen some of our owners, some of their key people, I'll say, get put out of the game for a minute because they just keep grinding. They keep going, and then all of a sudden their body, they haven't taken care of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and all of a sudden it just shuts them down, and they're having a mental breakdown or they're sick. And so can you just talk a little bit about how important it is to recover and build a business in a way that allows you to sort of stay fresh, to keep things moving?
When you're training as an athlete, recovery is when you actually grow. So when you're out exerting force, lifting weights, running, doing whatever the things are that you do, you're not growing then. You're creating the triggers that generate a response, but the strength or the stamina or the rebuilding that's required for you to actually get faster, endure longer, to be stronger, that all happens during rest. And it's the only way to get that. There's things like ice baths and stuff like that you can do that will help. But ultimately, if you just rest sufficient amount of time, you'll be able to get more of what you're looking for. And so the idea is the same thing in leadership, is that particularly if you're running a company for years, is you need to build in times where you really are able to come back to work on a Monday and you're excited to be there. You come back to work on a new year, this time of year, and you are excited about the year to come. And most people, if they've been in it for a while, they have to do something to pull themselves to separate from what's going on, to be able to reconnect with that and just rejuvenate themselves. And so my recommendation is that most entrepreneurial type leaders tend to be drivers. They tend to push really hard. And it's kind of like one day, as a trainer, as someone who knew better, I decided, hey, I'm in my late 40s. This is my last chance to learn some gymnastic rings thing I wanted to learn, to do strongman competitive events, and I wanted to, basically those two things. So I started deadlifting heavy. I was fireman's carries, 400 plus pounds. I was working out on the rings. I was doing heavy bench presses, and I was in so much pain constantly. And I was doing all these things to try to manage the pain and the inflammation, taking supplements, doing wraps, doing all these different things. And it was so difficult. The most difficult thing for me would have been to have said, you know what, maybe I need to cut my training schedule down. I would have gotten far better results and have been healthier if I had actually done less and taken some rest and taken that seriously. And I think that's what a lot of leaders, they grind so hard to build their company that when they finally get it going, they have a hard time feeling like anything else is even possibly a right answer. And many owners struggle with a sense of guilt that if I'm not showing up working, if I don't look busy and stressed, then my employees won't respect me. And that's a deep underlying fear that many owners have, that if I'm not, about half of my clients are in construction, another large chunk of them are in medical, and both of those industries have cultures that are based around working way too much, and this belief that I need to look like I'm working all the time. And it's very hard for people to take breaks. And so they burn out or they self-medicate, which is very common.
Yeah. Yeah. Common and destructive too, right?
Yeah.
Very, very good. And one thing that you, I think about the book Outliers, and it talks about the 10,000 hours. But one thing, I think it's in that like same paragraph that he introduces the 10,000 hour piece. The other piece that he talks about is the top performers. What they have in conjunction with that 10,000 hours is they sleep more than anybody else. And so they're getting rest. They're taking that learning and they're allowing it to sink in, letting their subconscious work on it while their body recovers. And I think sleep is the underutilized performance enhancing drug, both
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
In the gym and in the office. So I think that's great.
I think prioritizing sleep and making sure that you build the right kind of habits around that, it has such a broad positive effect on almost everything that, But I think it's just one of those things. You have to rest, and rest is what produces growth. And if you refuse to do that, you will always inhibit your growth.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Christian, this has been a fantastic overview of just the framework that you've developed and the way you think about growing and scaling a business. So I think there's a couple different ways that people can engage with you. Obviously, Train to Lead, fantastic book. Again, I was just blown away when I started listening to it. Just you can tell you've got lots of experience in the trenches, working with business owners that you understand how to grow and scale a business. So my recommendation, and we'll have links to it in the show notes, is everybody go grab Christian's book, Train to Lead. It's fantastic. Also, he's got a free download that you can go get as well that I think is wonderful as well. I went through the assessment. It was so eye-opening to look at it myself and just go, okay, here's some areas that I could polish up. But outside of the books and free resources, can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to engage with you? I know you do some succession planning, some exit planning, but also just consulting on how to grow and scale a business for eventually, one of those outcomes. So can you talk through a little bit about what a consulting engagement looks like?
Yeah, well, I custom build my consulting engagements. And so I think if somebody wanted to work together, in big buckets, I work with companies that are trying to scale and grow, and then companies that are looking at some kind of leadership transition or an exit. So those are the main buckets that I work in. In any of those, if somebody wanted to work with me, what I like to do is sit down and spend a significant amount of time, no obligation on anyone inside, but to just understand their goals. And then from that, once I understand what the goals are, I build, you could call it a training plan, but I build, all right, here's my recommendations for how we get there. And I usually give them a few different options depending on what will suit them the best. And then we move ahead from there.
I love it. It's, you've got all the tools in the tool belt, and so you can create a custom strategy for somebody to help them grow and scale. I think that's fantastic. Because when I think about leadership, right, on one hand, when we invest in leadership, it's like the number one determining factor of how our business is going to grow. Because if it's just relying on me, there's problems there. So I've got to lead my people well. If I cast a vision, create the systems and the structures and the habits, and encourage my people in a way that empowers them to go do great things, like the business is going to grow. On the other hand, if I don't engage my people and lead them well, right? Like I think about, the true definition of a leader is somebody that people follow, right? If I'm trying to lead, quote unquote, from an authority position, and I'm sort of whipping my people into shape, nobody enjoys that, and I'm not going to get the best outcome. So I think being a strong leader is critical to business success. Otherwise we're going to be just continuing to struggle in our business. And, business is hard. Like businesses go out of business all the time. And I would hate to see that happen to somebody that doesn't invest in their leadership. So I think this conversation has been fantastic. Any last nuggets, any other calls to action that we should point people to before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I guess, just you listed a lot of things that somebody might need to be able to do to lead effectively. And I can imagine a listener hearing that and just saying, I'm not good at any of those things, or, I can only do one or two. And what I want to encourage is that the way I structured Train to Lead is not that, hey, here's 20 some ideas that you need to have right or you're not a good leader, because that would be overwhelming for anybody. What I wanted to do was create a path where here's one step that you can take to become better at this. Now, here's another step you can take to become better at that. And if you just consistently, not pushing super hard, but just consistently take all these steps, you'll be a better leader. And I wanted to make it as easy and as bite-sized and as approachable as possible. And so I just want to make sure nobody hears that and feels overwhelmed that, man, there's so many things I have to learn. I'm a really good engineer. I don't know any of those things that you just said. Yeah. I'd hate for somebody to be in that position.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just again, another plug for the Train to Lead journal. Again, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. There's a training plan in there. So it's like all of this sounds overwhelming, but you start and you're like, okay, cool. Christian gives me what to do in the first 21 days. I'm just going to start stacking these healthy habits, building some of my conditioning, all of those other pieces. And so I highly recommend the book. I highly recommend the training journal. I think all of those things are fantastic for just figuring out this leadership piece. And then, I can also, one thing that we preach often is who, not how, right? Like I can go read all the articles and watch the videos on YouTube on trying to be a better leader, or I can bring somebody into my life like you to help me change the direction of my business in a tremendous way. And so I look at those. I have coaches everywhere in my life, right? I've got business coaches, I've got fitness coaches, I've got my mental health coach, I got them all the stuff, right? Everything that I think is important. And so it's like, I don't see those as costs. I see those as investments that give me a real tangible return. So I really appreciate this conversation. I think this has been valuable to me, valuable to our listeners. I can't recommend enough the book Train to Lead. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. It was great to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Vital Wealth Strategies podcast. If there's one big takeaway from the conversation with Christian, it's this. Scaling your business isn't about working more. It's about leading better. By being intentional with your leadership, enabling your team, and focusing on meaningful incremental gains, you can actually free yourself up to work less while driving greater results. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with another entrepreneur or leader who needs to hear it. I want to encourage you to keep up the good work. To take your business to the next level, it is a small, consistent improvements day after day that makes a huge difference over time. I encourage you to keep implementing, keep leading, and keep pushing forward. It will be worth it. And remember, you're a vital entrepreneur. You're vital because you're the backbone of our economy, creating opportunities, driving growth, and making an impact. You're vital to your family, creating abundance in every aspect of life. And you're vital to me because you're committed to growing your wealth, leading with purpose, and creating something truly great. Thank you for being a part of this incredible community of vital entrepreneurs. I appreciate you, and I look forward to having you back here next time on the Vital Wealth Strategies podcast, where we help entrepreneurs minimize their taxes, master wealth, and optimize their lives.